And hello, everyone. Welcome to the 4th episode this year. We're doing great. Of course, Houston, I know it's been cold and wet this week, and now we're getting back into the 70s, so you never know what you're going to wear from day to day. And it just happens. But just so everybody knows, Amy is pretty much out sick, unfortunately. She either has strep throat or COVID with the symptoms that she described. I would definitely say more like strep throat. So send your prayers to her. And I know we have four more shows scheduled, and 3 of them are going to be conventions that are going to be happening here in the Houston area. So looking forward to talking to them and seeing who they might be able to tell us is coming to their show. But today we are here with Tiffany Grant, and I have to say it was a privilege meeting at Waifu Fest. And I know we've been talking, we actually went to the same high school. So we actually had a lot to talk about.
Yes, indeed.
So I have to ask
Go
you,
Highlanders.
Yes, definitely. Go
Yes.
Highlanders. What got you started into voice acting?
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here, Greg, with my fellow McCullough alum. I always was kind of involved with acting, just about as far back as I can remember, like doing a school play in the 2nd grade, the Elves and the Shoemaker. And so I was doing, plays in grade school, junior high, high school, college, all of that. And I had really sort of acquired an interest in voice acting, although I wouldn't have known the term to use that term, voice acting. Probably starting maybe around the time I was about 9 years old. I got this little Sony tape player, like for Christmas one year. And back in the day, before you had, digital recording things, what you recorded stuff on was that tapes. And I would, with my friends, we would make up these sketches and characters and do terrible celebrity impersonations, and we would record them on these tapes. And I think we recorded over a lot of them because, you had to buy the cassette tapes. All we had was our allowance. Anyway, but I never thought of that as like really being a job or anything. It was just something I kind of did for fun. And then in 1994, actually just in a few days, we'll be coming up on my 29th anniversary, I heard about an audition that was going on from a friend of mine, somebody that I had known since junior high. There was a brand new company that had started up in Houston, where I'm from, and AD Vision is what it was called, and they were going to dub their very first anime. So they were looking for actors. They had never hired any actors before. No anime had ever been dubbed in Texas at that point. And so they told all their friends, like, hey, if you know any actors, tell them to come to our audition. And so, AD Vision at the time, I don't know, they maybe had like a half a dozen employees. It wasn't very many people. And so they all kind of asked their friends, hey, does anybody know some actors? And one of the people who knew them also knew me. So there was a mutual friend between me and one of the original ADV people. And he said, hey, you know, this is what's going on, and they're looking for some actors. And I remembered that you're an actor, and maybe you'd be interested. So that's kind of how it all started. That was, as I like to say, the genesis. But I called them up and I said, hey, I heard that you're having an audition. And they said, oh, sure, yeah, you can come to the audition. And they gave me an appointment time. And I went down to the audition. It was at Texas Video and Post in South Houston, kind of like over where Astroworld used to be, where Astroworld actually still was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the audition February 12th, 1994. I went in, and what they had us to do, this was everything about this particular production was totally different. It is not the way it has ever been done since at all. But again, they had never hired actors before. So they passed around some scripts that had like a couple of scenes from the show that we were doing, which was Guy Double Target. And then also there was like a monologue from a Marx Brothers movie, like A Night at the Opera or something. And so we went into the audition, and that's what we did. And I had worked on the script, you call it a side, like the part of the script that we had. So I did all that, and I went in and I auditioned, and I remember there was a villain, Helga Hildias Heel. And I decided that she should be Russian because, again, this was 1994. So back then, all the villains in movies were always Russian. And so I read for that. And then I read for the female lead as well, Reina. And I thought it went pretty well. You know, I was asked to read, you know, different ways, different things. And the guy who was the director there, Matt Greenfield, he said something like, well, that was good, and I'm sure we'll be contacting you sometime soon. You know, he's very reserved, I always say stoic. Matt's very stoic. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, okay, you know. So I walked out the door to get in my car. It was raining just a little bit. There was a light rain. And John Ledford, who's the co-founder of ADV, he came running out the door and he says, oh my gosh, that was great. And then he like realizes that it's raining. So he's like, can we get in your car? So we sat inside my car, and he was telling me that I was the best audition, and that they wanted me to play the female lead role in their movie. And I was like so excited, especially based on that, what the other guy was saying, like he was super stoic. And I'm sure that was fine. I'm gonna be fine soon. That's my Matt Greenfield impression. Anyway, so I got hired, and then they asked me to come back the next day because they were going to have callbacks. And so callback auditions, that's typically when you're narrowing the field. So this is done very commonly, like in plays and in films, commercials, whatever. You have the big audition where you see everybody, and then you kind of narrow that down. So I went back the next day, and I read scenes with the, you know, sort of top 3 or 4 or 5 choices to play Guy, which ended up being Rob Mungle, the legend. And then reading scenes with kind of the second female character in the show. Oh gosh, what was her name? I can't remember the character's name. I mean, I only did it 29 years ago. Anyway, but the actor who was hired was Carol Amerson, who ended up being in a lot of the early ADV shows. She was the original voice actor for Hikari and Evangelion. So yeah, that's kind of, and Marcy Ray. I'm not sure if I read it opposite Marcy Ray, but she ended up playing Helga Hildias Heel, and then again going on to become an ADV legend. But that's really how the whole thing started. So several years later, I started reflecting back on this, and I was thinking, wait a minute, I was the first actor to be hired in Texas to voice anime. It didn't even, you know, at the time I was just excited about it. It was my first paid acting job, you know. And yeah, that's the long version of the story. But basically, that's how I got involved with the whole thing. And at the time, again, nobody was dubbing anime in Texas yet. So I was there like at the beginning.
So definitely before Crunchyroll and Funimation.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Funimation started up ADV actually started in 1992, so they were originally releasing subtitled shows. Funimation, I think they started right around 1994, and of course their first thing they did was Dragon Ball, but for their first 2 or 3 years that they were dubbing it, it was being dubbed up at Ocean Studios in Vancouver. So they didn't start dubbing their own shows in-house until, I want to say 96 or 97. I'm not 100% sure on the dates on that, but it was something around there.
Yes, I have to say we've actually talked with Saffron Henderson, who did Young Gohan and Young Goku at the time in Vancouver.
Oh, okay.
So she's a wonderful person if you haven't met her.
I have not, but that is so cool. I mean, anyway, but that's how everything got started. So for me, obviously I was competing against other people for the role, other actors, but I guess the advantage that I had at the time is I was not competing against anyone else who was, maybe they could have had some voiceover experience, but there were no anime voice actors because it had never been done in Texas at that time. So we were breaking new ground.
That is actually totally awesome. And to think it happened here in Houston.
Yes, it did, at Texas Video and Post. And back then, the only time that they could get to record was like in the middle of the night. So would we work on that show? Oh my gosh, Greg. Yeah, we were doing the auditions were on weekend. But then when we actually recorded it, it was like in the middle of the night. Like the session would be, from 9 or 10 o'clock at night until 4 in the morning or something. It was horrible. And that was the case on the first thing, Guy Double Target. And then the second show that we dubbed, which was several months later, was Samurai Showdown, the motion picture. And again, we were doing that in the middle of the night. And it was exhausting.
Might be exhausting, but knowing the Houston traffic, that was probably the best time.
Yes, much less traffic for sure. Yeah. Oh my goodness. But that's really how we started out. And then in 96, ADV actually built their very first studio that was their own studio, that they operated out of their own property.
So it was almost just knowing the right people at the right time.
Yeah, really. I'm sure if I hadn't got hired to work on that project, I would have been involved in anime at some point, because really there's virtually no actor anywhere in the greater Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin area who hasn't worked in anime at this point. All of us have. I just was very lucky to find out about that first audition and get in there when I did, because it's the competition it's a lot different now. So you're competing against thousands of people who have experience working in anime, and I got to be a lead in my very first job.
It is very competitive. I know a lot of people who have been trying to get into it, some who are just getting into it, and I know that they talk about the difficulties.
And that's a difficult question that I have, is people say, "Oh, geez, well, how do I get into that?" And I am literally the worst person to ask, because I was like, "Well, I don't know. Do you have a time machine? Maybe you can go back to 1994." I don't know what to tell people.
It's very true, because I think in 96 or 97, I actually was asked to do an audition, but it was to be done on a tape. And they didn't specify back then. So it's like, okay, let me go ahead and I'll go to a studio. I'll get the tape done. They put it on one of those smaller tapes, which I could actually eventually record it to cassette tapes. Yes, I'm talking cassette tapes, people. Before CDs. And then when I turned it in, they said, "Oh, we just wanted you to do it straight out. We didn't want you to go to a studio and do it." And it's like, "Oh, come on."
It's back in the day you had to, go into some studio somewhere to do an audition. And of course, for years and years now, I've done all my auditions at home. And I went as soon as we were able, because we were auditioning from home way before most people were in a position to, actually record a job, record some kind of a finished thing. But I've been auditioning for projects at home for, gosh, definitely over 10 years now.
It is.
That was a game changer. Yeah.
And I know COVID did a lot of game changing with the studios as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've heard that they only allow one people in the studio to record at some places.
Yeah.
So
one of the things I know that they were doing and maybe still will keep doing is, studios, they used to always be booked just back to back, back to back. So, maybe I would go in and have a session from 10 until 1, and then the next person would record from 1 until 2, and then somebody be from 2 until 7, or you know what I mean? There was no break. And so then what they've started doing is putting some like buffer of time in between to like clean and disinfect the room and whatever. But that used to not be the case at all. I mean, you'd really just be going in right in behind somebody. So that was one of the changes.
Now, did you ever get to read off of people, or did you just do all your recordings at once?
Yeah, well, the standard method for dubbing of a foreign language film, which is, of course, what anime falls into, but the standard way that that's done, whether it's, whatever country, it's just like the industry standard for this practice, is that you just really have one actor in the studio at time. So there's not very many people there. You've got your voice actor in the recording booth, and then in the outside part of the studio, usually you've got a director and a sound engineer, and normally those are all of the people. I have worked on some projects in the past that had 2, or in one case even 3 isolation booths where we had windows, and we could see the other actors. That's usually not the case. It doesn't logistically usually make sense to do that. There's only very specific circumstances where that actually works. And most studios aren't set up like that anyway.
Well, I was going to ask, when you did it like that, did you enjoy reading off the people where you could?
Oh, yeah, it was great. There was a show called Go Dinner that we did back in 2006. And it was based on these teams of robot pilots. So most of the actors, like, they had a person with whom nearly all of their dialogue took place. So if you think of, I don't know, a lot of shows that you might watch, I'm just going to pick Evangelion just for the sake of talking. So if you were Shinji, in any given episode, Shinji would have a scene with Misato, with Kensuke, with Toji, with Ritsuko, with Asuka, with Rei. That one character would have scenes with all these different people. So how would you logistically schedule that? You'd have to get everybody to be there to come in and talk for 5 minutes, and then the other person, it just doesn't make any sense. But on Go Dinner, where you had, like, say, my character, a lot of the scenes that I had were, oh my gosh, I can't remember the character's name, which is terrible because I wrote the scripts, but Chris Ayers was the actor. And, oh man, that's driving me crazy. I can't think of the character's name. But anyway, that was so awesome when he and I could look at each other, because a lot of times we were doing things in unison, and we'd do the ridiculous call outs of the maneuvers that we were going to do, like thrusting kick or whatever. And yes, I mean, it was super fun to have that opportunity. But like I said, logistically, there's no way for it to make sense on a regular basis. But I'll go back and tell you, the very first show that we did, Guy Double Target, they did get all of the actors. Any funny behind the scenes made good stories? No. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. So when we were working on the very first show, Guy Double Target, and again, none of us had ever done this before. We were in the studio that we were using, the actual recording part where the actors stand with the microphones. It was not like a little booth. which is what we standard that we use now. We were in a studio that was used like to record bands. So it was this huge room. And the director was actually Matt Greenfield, the director. He was standing in that room next to myself and Rob Mungle. We were all standing in this room together at the same time. And the problem with that is that if one person makes a mistake, then everyone has to go back and redo it. And I remember some times, and again, please remember, we were recording this at like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning when we were exhausted. And there was one guy that they brought in, and I do know his name, but I'm not going to say it. But anyway, he was kind of a wannabe actor who was a friend of somebody's, and they let him have this small part. And I remember that we were in there trying to do this scene, and we did it over and over and over again. And I mean, I wanted to kill the guy because it was horrible. and you know, if you're doing it in the more standard way that's always done now, where you have one actor at a time, I would have been able to record my dialogue and I would be done and I could just move on to my next scene. But as it was, I had to keep doing all of my lines over and over and over again because we were recording at the same time. And that was unbelievably frustrating. Yes. But any other, oh my gosh. I tell you what, I can remember. So another one from the early days working on Samurai Showdown. The character that I played was Charlotte, and she is French. And I remember John Ledford, who was the president of ADV, still works in the business, you know, but he wasn't really. He was kind of around in those days, but he wasn't actively participating in producing the show because Matt was directing these things. But I can remember John sleeping on a couch in the outer part of the studio, and I remember him waking up at one point and kind of groggily listening to us for a moment and then making critiques of my French accent. And I was like, well, John, you tried doing a French accent at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know? It was rough. It was really rough back then. And, you know, it was when we first had the first ADV studio, that was tricky because there were a lot of technical problems with the first studio. And it ended up being completely dismantled and rebuilt because this guy assured them he knew what he was doing. And spoiler, he did not. Yeah, it was really like frontier days back then. Perseverance. Yeah. Nowadays, you know, all the people that you're working with, they're seasoned professionals. All these people, all the sound engineers, the directors, the script writers, everybody, they all know what they're doing because we've done it for such a long time and we all have a lot of experience, and it goes much more quickly, and and the technology has improved and so forth. But it is very interesting to reflect back on those early days.
Definitely. Now, one question I always also like to ask is there a certain character that you can reflect with yourself that you have like the commonalities with, or?
Well, I always kind of thought Becky Farah from Gunsmith Cats. She puts up with a lot from Rally. Rally Vincent is always asking her for favors, and my character Becky is kind of like a private investigator who works for Rally, and Rally's more like a sort of a bounty hunter type. I don't know how much I personally have literally in common with Asuka. Of course, that's the character that I'm most associated with. But I mean, I love Asuka. You know, Asuka is part of me, and I can't sort of extricate myself from Asuka. Asuka and I are joined forever. We're conjoined twins somehow.
Well, it's always good to have something that you're really connected to.
Yes. When the whole Netflix debacle happened, and that was really a difficult thing for me going through that. And I genuinely asked myself, and this might sound crazy to people, but I said out loud to myself, I don't know who I am if I'm not Asuka, and I feel that connected to her, that she's just really part of me, part of who I am.
And I think it's now on Amazon Prime.
Yes, it is. The rebuild movies are on Amazon Prime. It's a little trickier if you want to watch Neon Genesis Evangelion, the original TV show. That's trickier to find. You either have to find the old ADV DVDs, some version of that. The platinum version is better if you can find it. When the Blu-ray came out last year, if you bought the super deluxe version, you could get the, I think they called it the classic dub. Yeah. So it's trickier, but it's still around. It'd be nice sometime if our version was more widely available. That would be great.
Definitely. Now, you have been doing a lot of conventions. And I notice you have a few coming up. Is some you can tell us about that you're going to?
Let me see. I think, boy, I don't have my list in front of me. I think the next one, just off the top of my head, is I'm doing Augusta-con in Augusta, Georgia. It's a one-day event on Saturday, the May 6th. So I will be there, and I have several other ones that I've sort of been invited to that I don't think are official yet. I am, oh gosh, I hesitate to say. I try to keep that updated on my website, which is tiffanygrant.com. I know that's terribly original. And I always make announcements on my Facebook group as well, Tiffany Grant Fan Club on Facebook. So I do try to keep those mentions on there so that people know what's what. Oh, yeah, there you go, tiffanygrant.com.
Now, I actually used to live in Augusta for a few years, so.
Oh, okay. They have the big golf tournament there. That's where the Masters happens.
Oh, Lordy, I lived right next to that golf course. I did not ever want to drive. That is worse than Houston traffic.
Yeah, I'm sure
especially
it's terrible.
During that time. Ooh.
Yeah. Actually, when I was growing up in the Woodlands, they did the Houston Open was held in the Woodlands many years in a row at the Woodlands Country Club, I guess. But there was a PGA course there in the Woodlands, which is just north of Houston, and oh my gosh, whenever that was happening, whenever the Houston Open was there, this was kind of a small town, really, and the traffic would just become nightmarish all of a sudden. And kids were routinely like skipping school. And one of the big things was that on the first day, they would have the celebrity pro-am, and there would always be these celebrities out there. And I remember I went 2 years in a row. I skipped school 2 years in a row to, and I think they eventually started just making a teacher in-service day because there would be so many kids who skipped school. But yeah, we went out there, me and my best friend James, and we were running around chasing different celebrities and collecting their autographs, and I can remember meeting Bryant Gumbel from the Today Show and Charlie Pride who was a very famous country music singer, and he was like, that was right in his heyday at the time. Lee Trevino, who was a famous golfer. I mean, he was a golfer, but he was also kind of like a celebrity golfer, like, like Arnold Palmer or somebody like that.
Yes.
Anyway, I don't remember all the celebrities that we met, but we had a list of who the celebrities were, and we would be like checking them off to run around and find them and get their signatures. Yeah. Speaking of golf tournaments,
it's funny how you said that they made it into a teacher in service day, because at Augusta, in Augusta, they actually made it spring break.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because nobody wants to drive around.
Yeah, and not only that, but people would actually rent out their houses to people coming down, and then they would go on their vacation somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, several years later, my grandmother was like a huge golf fan, and I was able to get tickets for her and my grandpa to go to the Houston Open. And the company that was hosting the party had rented out a house that was on the golf course. And I think companies paid many thousands of dollars to rent out those houses just for, a couple days.
Oh, yeah.
And that was like all the fancy people lived in the houses on the golf course. We did not live in a fancy house on the golf course, Greg. That we did not do that. But
no, I was back in the back near Research Forest. So it has grown.
Yes, it has. I was going to say Research Forest was not even a thing when I was living there. But anyway, people don't want to hear about our glory days at McCullough High School.
No, neither was 242. So
right.
Oh man, yeah, we could talk a lot about the past. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I do go. Going back to the conventions thing, I started doing conventions in 1997. So I have been doing conventions for over 25 years now, and I do still attend several conventions every year. It's kind of a trend that I've noticed over the past year or so seems to me that I'm getting invitations with very short notice. And it doesn't seem that way to me. It is that way. I am now on a regular basis getting invited to a convention that might be happening in the next 2 to 4 weeks, where I used to always get invited to conventions 6, 8, 12, 14, 15 months in advance. I mean, it was not at all unusual to be invited to a convention a year or more in advance.
Oh, I'm not going to say names, but I do help out some conventions around here. And like I said, I'm not going to say names, but one of them has actually just threw one onto somebody else, saying, "Here, take it. Let's see what you can do with it." And it's like 2 months away, and it's like, people, you need more time than that, because a lot of people are already booked, and it makes it difficult.
Yeah. Well, the thing that always concerns me is getting people to the show.
Yes.
Oh yeah, doing events before they became mainstream. Oh, no kidding. Yeah, when I was doing conventions back in the 90s, people would actually refer to convention season. And by that, they generally meant like the summertime. That would be con season. I mean, you go to animecons.com, and every weekend there are multiple conventions happening every weekend. There are so many. And now it used to be that you'd feel pretty good if there was a convention that you could drive to within, 4 or 5 hours. Now people expect one to be, 10 or 15 minutes away from their house. Right. And that's generally what they expect. They expect there to be a convention in Augusta. It's not good enough for there to just be one in Atlanta, and that's the one that everybody in the whole state of Georgia goes to. No, there's going to be conventions in Augusta and Savannah and, all over the place. So that's very much expected. And I love the conventions, really. They would think they would line up the guests and wait to announce the names. Well, that does happen. And that's why I was hesitant to say anything, because even when I'm confirmed with the convention and I know that I'm going to it, I don't say anything publicly until they've announced it on their website. But,
Yes.
you know, when I got invited to Waifu Fest in Houston, I was invited to that 4 or 5 weeks before the convention happened. And at the point that they invited me, I mean, the first thing I always do when I get invited to a convention is like, well, I do a little Google search, look for their website. They didn't have a website. They didn't have a Facebook page. They didn't have anything. And it was pretty amazing. Oh, thanks, Chris. It was pretty amazing to me that in a month, they actually, they within a couple days, they had a website, they had a Facebook group. There was a vendor room that was full of vendors. They had guests. People actually attended the convention. Yeah, I mean, it is true. There are so many, and you don't have to drive for 5 or 10 hours, although people still do. When I did that convention in Houston, there were a lot of people who had driven there from Dallas and, you know, San Antonio, Austin, you know, that had driven for a few hours or several hours. And when I was doing that convention in Houston, New Year's weekend, I had not yet been invited to go to something called the Otaku Food Anime Village, which was a free festival that happened in Dallas the last weekend of January. So I was in Houston, and there were people who drove from Dallas to see me in Houston. And then some of those people, I saw them again when I was in Dallas. And I had to say to them, I'd be like, look, when you just saw me in Houston earlier this month, I did not know that I was going to be in Dallas because they invited me to that like 3 weeks beforehand. And I mean, that's just a lot of these things are going like that. It's stunning to me to not ask people, but you know, I'm very old school. So but if the thing is, if I'm available and you invite me to come to an event, I'll probably go. I don't often turn things down. And if I do, it's usually because I have a conflict that I'm already doing something else. So for the most part, if somebody invites me, I will go.
That's always good to know.
Yeah. I like it. I enjoy it. I've done almost 300 conventions now. And by the way, in nearly every U.S. state, and I have done a convention that was actually in the District of Columbia. So my 4 states to complete my bingo card, I'm waiting on Wyoming and Montana, which do have conventions, but you know, smaller populations there. And then Delaware and Rhode Island, which are very tiny states, but they also do have conventions. So I'm hopeful.
I'm trying to think. I know there's one up in Fargo.
Oh yeah, I've already done I've done North Dakota.
You've done North Dakota?
Yeah. Like I said, it's only Wyoming, Montana, Delaware, and Rhode Island. Those are, I've done Anime Fargo.
Wow.
So just waiting on those 4 states, just those 4 states. And I've been at that point for a few years now where I'm waiting on those last 4 states. That would be amazing. That would really. That, people. I know. Wyoming, Montana, Delaware, and Rhode Island. That's it. That's it. Just those 4.
Do they have them in Rhode Island?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In Providence, they've had conventions. I've actually been to Rhode Island before. I just haven't done a convention there. So.
Okay.
For my bingo card, it doesn't count.
I just wasn't sure what the size of it, if they did it multi-state or not.
Well, they have had some Comic-Cons in Providence. My one funny Rhode Island story is when I was living in Connecticut back in 1986. It was July 4th weekend, and so we decided, let's go to the beach. So keeping in mind, at that point, I had lived up until March 1st, 1986. I had lived my entire life on the Texas Gulf Coast. So if I'd gone to the beach, it was like Galveston, Padre Island. I'd only been to the beach really in Texas. Oh, and in Florida, you know. Oh, I think California too. But the point is, I had only gone to the beach in warm places. Right? So I go to the beach in Rhode Island, July 4th, 1986. And it's a beautiful, warm, sunny day. I don't know, the temperature was probably 80 degrees or whatever it is in Rhode Island at that time of year. Put one foot in the water, and there were so many people who were in the water. And I was completely unprepared for how cold that water was. And I was like, well, I'm done. Let's just sit here on the sand where it's warm. And people from New England, you can all laugh at me about that. But yeah, I was very naive. I didn't know. Well, that was a learning experience.
I can see
so I've
that.
been to Rhode Island. I've been to Rhode Island, just haven't done a convention there. So it's on the wish list.
Like I said, I lived in Virginia for 2 years.
Which like DC has the really hot, sultry summers and then the really, really frigidly cold winters.
Because that's exactly where I was, in the DC area.
Right.
It's like, no. But I do want to say we have your website up, and where else can people find you?
Oh, yes. Thank you. So I don't do a ton of social media because too much drama. But I am on Facebook. I do my Facebook group, which is the Tiffany Grant Fan Club. No, I did not start my own fan club. Actually, someone else started it many, many years ago. And then I eventually ended up joining it and I participate in it. So that is where I'm active, where we can communicate in the Tiffany Grant Fan Club on Facebook. I don't do friends. I don't do any of that. We can post and communicate and whatever there. I did a couple months ago start a YouTube channel. Wow. Yes, that's right. I started a YouTube channel. Amazing. So I'm not great at video, but I'm trying to challenge myself with this. And so that my on YouTube is Tiffany Grant 2365. So if you look for Tiffany Grant 2365, that is my YouTube channel. So it's a lot of it's cat videos. I'm not going to lie. This whole time I've been talking to you, there's been an orange tabby cat in my lap named Tora. He's sitting in my lap this whole time, keeping my lap warm or keeping his feet warm. One of those things, whichever is more important to him.
Yeah. I do know that. We have, like I tell people, we have 3 dogs here inside. We have 8 cats outside. And of course we have and 5 chickens.
Oh, okay. So, wow, and they lay eggs of gold now, or they're worth gold or something like that.
Yes. And we get several a day.
Well, that's great.
Time to go sell them at the corner. $100 a dozen. $100 a dozen.
That's about what they're going for. Yeah, I started about a year ago. I buy all of my eggs from a little local farm. It's just a couple of miles away from me, and I go there and I get my eggs. I weigh the chickens and I thank them. Thanks, ladies. So I can see the actual chickens who laid my eggs, and I am appreciative of them, and I like that. I like supporting the local economy and buying local and eating the fresh eggs. And
that is totally awesome. I have to say that. I'm sure you don't pay $100 a dozen, though.
No, they were for a long time. They were $4. They briefly were $5, and they're now actually $6 a dozen, which is not too far off of what you would spend in the grocery store. Actually, if in the grocery store, if I wanted to buy, basically his eggs are they're like organic free range eggs. So if I wanted to buy organic free range eggs in the grocery store, they would be more expensive than $6 anyway.
Yeah.
So and I can see the actual chickens. I find that to be comforting, that I can see them right there.
Yeah, that does help.
I'm sure your chick, since you only have 5, they probably all have names.
No, I haven't named them.
Oh, well, that's all right. Well, thank you so much for
Yes,
inviting
thank
me
you.
here. It was a very nice chat with my fellow Highlander. Appreciate that.
Yes, and
And
everybody, I want them to go subscribe to your YouTube channel, follow
yes,
you on Facebook,
yes,
and we
all of
do want to
that.
definitely thank you for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And everybody else, we will be on next Thursday at 6 p.m. I'm not even going to try to pronounce names right now. I'll get that later.
Wise choice. Wise choice.
But everybody, thank you for joining, and we will see you next week. Until then.